If you're trying to pin down the exact moment the old world quietly decided it had enough of America, mark this down. Monday afternoon, January 26th, 2026. That was the second the marriage cracked. The location, the European Parliament, the mood, electric, and not in a good way. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stepped up, locked eyes with Europe's leadership, and dropped a line that detonated the room. If anyone believes Europe can defend itself without the United States, keep dreaming. It can't. That wasn't just a comment. That was centuries of European military history wiped out in one sentence. You could feel the panic, French officials visibly boiling, Polish delegates barely hiding their rage. Why? Because Rutte hasn't acted like the leader of a 32-nation alliance. He's acted like a diplomatic pressure valve for the White House. But here's where the script flips. Within hours, France's foreign minister fired back, cold, precise, and devastating. Europe can defend itself, and Europe must. This wasn't abstract strategic autonomy talk anymore. This was a power grab. While Rutte was still trying to save the transatlantic marriage, EU leaders were already packing boxes and changing locks. They weren't dreaming. They were building something new. A shadow NATO. One that doesn't need Washington's permission to move troops, protect borders, or fire back. The trigger? The 100% Canada-style tariff threat. The Greenland ransom drama. Europe finally realized that being part of a US plus 31 club means you're one Truth Social post away from total exposure. The "you're out" era has begun, and Rutte might be the last man in Brussels to notice he's being bypassed. So what is this shadow NATO really? Not a slogan, not a think tank fantasy. It's a parallel command structure that's been quietly under construction since May 2025. And it comes with money. Serious money. The $150 billion war chest. While Washington obsessed over Greenland and tariffs, the European Commission quietly pulled the trigger on a financial weapon called SAFE, Security Action for Europe. On that same Monday, January 26, 2026, while Rutte lectured Parliament, the EU cleared the second funding wave, $150 billion in direct loans. This isn't American cash. This is Europe borrowing on its own credit to build its own military pillar. The biggest winner? Poland, nearly $44 billion, the largest slice of the pie, secured without asking an American general for approval. And here's the part that should terrify the Pentagon. For 75 years, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Chasseur, has always been an American. Always. The shadow NATO? It's designed to function outside that chain of command. The Nancy Treaty blueprint: enter the France-Poland Nancy Treaty. Paris and Warsaw aren't just coordinating. They're creating a shared strategic culture. Joint command hubs, independent decision-making. No green light required from a U.S. general to move forces or launch Mirage jets. Then comes the real break, the sovereign standard. Under SAFE rules, 65% of all military equipment purchased must be 100% European-made. Read that again. They are coding U.S. hardware out of Europe's defense future. That's why NATO HQ in Brussels is panicking, because the alliance is splitting inside the same building. On the first floor, Mark Rutte trying to keep Trump calm. On the second floor, Europe, building a military that can survive a full transatlantic divorce. As one French official put it, if the American umbrella is transactional, we need a roof made of European steel. And now we reach the most dangerous part of this breakup. For decades, Europe's security rested on one thing: the American nuclear umbrella. As of Thursday, January 29, 2026, that umbrella is full of holes. The Nancy Treaty bombshell. While media chased trade headlines, something far bigger happened in eastern France. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and French President Emmanuel Macron met in the city of Nancy and signed what they called a groundbreaking treaty. Hidden inside it, a premium security guarantee. Poland is now placed on the same security level as Germany. And then came the nuclear question. Tusk openly confirmed Poland is analyzing Macron's offer to extend France's nuclear deterrent eastward. This is the real curiosity gap. Why would the most pro-American country in Europe suddenly look to Paris for protection? Because France is the only nuclear power in the EU that is 100% independent. Unlike Britain, which relies on US tech, France's 290 warheads answer to exactly one person: the French president. France also has something unique: A final warning doctrine, the option of a limited nuclear strike as a last signal before full escalation. Macron has now signaled he's ready to extend that doctrine to protect allies. Moscow noticed. Russia called the move extremely confrontational. But for Poland, already building Europe's strongest army and spending nearly 5% of GDP on defense, the French nuclear shield is the missing piece. They're not imagining a post-US defense. They're constructing an atomic wall that doesn't need permission from a transactional White House. If you still think this divorce is just noise, circle one date in red, July 7th, 2026. That's the day leaders meet for the Ankara summit in Turkey. On paper, the invitation screams unity. Behind closed doors, Europe is carrying a very different script. The 5% now or never flashback to June 2025, The Hague. NATO members technically agreed to work toward 5% of GDP defense spending by 2035. It was meant to be gradual, a glide path. Then came the Trump rewrite. As of Wednesday, January 28, 2026, the White House has reportedly shredded the timeline. The new message is brutal and simple: 5% now, or the U.S. walks. But that's only half the trap. The Buy American lock Washington is signaling that defense spending only counts if it's spent on American-made hardware. No French Rafales, no German Leopards, just F-35s, Abrams tanks, U.S. supply chains, U.S. permissions. This isn't burden sharing, this is submission. And here's where the shock hits. Europe has finally found its no. The Ankara counter-ultimatum leaked cables from behind the scenes reveal something unprecedented. Macron, Starmer, Poland's new leadership, aligned. They're walking into Ankara with a counteroffer that sounds more like a declaration. They're rejecting the acceleration. They're rejecting the Buy American mandate. Their message: we will spend the 5%, but we will spend it in Europe, under European command, backed by a European nuclear shield. That's why Washington is panicking. If the U.S. threatens to leave at Ankara, the shadow NATO is already standing behind Europe, ready to catch the pieces. Trump thinks he's entering a room to collect a check. Instead, he's walking into a room where the locks have already been changed. The Ankara summit isn't a negotiation. It's the moment Europe says, "You don't fire us, we fire you." The base problem: sacred ground no more. This is the part keeping Pentagon leadership awake. For nearly 80 years, U.S. bases like Ramstein in Germany and Aviano in Italy were untouchable. They weren't just bases. They were proof of the American guarantee. As of Thursday morning, January 29, 2026, that sacred ground looks very different, more like a liability. Picture this graphic: a chain-link fence, an eviction notice, a U.S. flag in the background, text: the rent is due. The tax the base strategy. The alarm bells in Washington started when the EU's anti-coercion office quietly launched a study on military land use fees. The logic is ruthless. If the U.S. treats Europe like a trade rival, slapping tariffs on German cars and taxing French wine to fund a border wall, why should Europe provide free land, water, and electricity to 80,000 U.S. troops? Then came the rumor that changed everything: a proposal circulating in Brussels. The defense offset. For every dollar the U.S. collects in illegal tariffs, host nations charge an equal amount in security and maintenance fees for American bases. And it goes even further. Base nationalization. Inside the shadow NATO blueprint is a section that terrifies Washington. If the U.S. withdraws its nuclear umbrella or turns NATO fully transactional, Europe demands base evacuation within 24 months. Ramstein wouldn't close. It would be taken over, rebranded as a European strategic transport hub, run by the EU, for the EU. The diplomatic message is nuclear level: you tax our exports, we tax your power. The White House believes the U.S. is doing Europe a favor by staying. Shadow NATO leaders are flipping the script. If you're not an ally, you're just a tenant. And the rent just went up 1,000%. By July, the U.S. military could be staring at the most expensive eviction notice in modern history. Europe acts, not talks. If you want proof this is real, look at what happened 48 hours ago. On Tuesday, January 27, 2026, while Washington was distracted by the Canada tariff fallout, Ukraine's defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov was meeting France's Sébastien Lecornu. This wasn't symbolism. It was logistics, the Mirage test case. France didn't just promise support, they proved they can run a high-intensity war without U.S. approval. Ukraine is receiving an additional batch of Mirage 2005 fighters. Unlike F-16s, which come with endless U.S. permissions, the Mirage runs on a 100% European supply chain. From Mika missiles to Scalp cruise missiles, France is demonstrating that Europe can sustain a modern air war without a single call to Washington. Then came the AASM factor. France is shipping more AASM hammer-guided bombs, the very weapons the U.S. tried to gatekeep for years. This isn't just about Ukraine. Macron is sending a message to the shadow NATO. You can fight, you can win, and you don't need America's keys. The intelligence break. But the most dangerous shift isn't hardware. It's data. France and Ukraine are building a shared intelligence network that bypasses traditional NATO channels. Battlefield analytics, satellite imagery, AI-driven drone targeting. No U.S. in the loop. Inside the American intelligence community, the fear is simple. Their monopoly is ending. The Mirage isn't just a jet anymore. It's a symbol, a European shield, the man left behind. And now, look at the man stuck in the middle. As of Thursday, January 29, 2026, Mark Rutte isn't leading NATO. He's managing a rebellion. Inside the European Commission, they've stopped calling him Secretary General. They call him the U.S. Ambassador to Brussels. After his "keep dreaming" comment, the revolt went public. French and Polish delegations are holding pre-meetings for Ankara, and Rutte isn't invited. They're building the shadow NATO agenda without him. Rutte is trying to play both sides. Telling Washington he has Europe under control, telling Europe they need to be realistic. But Europe doesn't want realism. They want sovereignty. And Rutte is seen as the man trying to sell it out. There's even talk of appointing a European security coordinator, a role that would quietly strip Rutte of power over defense spending and strategy. The question isn't if he's finished. It's how long can someone lead when no one listens anymore? Rutte is standing on a bridge that's already collapsed. He's not the captain. He's the man watching the lifeboats, shadow NATO lifeboats, being lowered. Final verdict. As of Thursday night, January 29, 2026, the NATO we knew, the US plus 31 club, is effectively dead. It's been replaced by two alliances in one building, both heading for the exit. The White House made its choice. The 2026 National Defense Strategy wasn't a warning. It was a roadmap. Europe is now a secondary priority. The Pacific comes first. The blank check is over. Trump isn't asking for 5%. He's asking for total control over European defense. And Europe finally said no by bypassing Rutte, creating the France-Poland axis, activating the $150 billion safe fund, building its own command and nuclear shield. Europe has chosen independence over obedience. The fatal mistake was thinking "keep dreaming" would scare them back into line. It didn't. It woke them up. By the time leaders meet in Ankara, the plus 31 club will be a ghost. America is becoming a fortress. Europe is becoming a power. And in 2026, loyalty isn't measured in treaties. It's measured in who controls the armory. The countdown to Ankara has started. I'm tracking the shadow agenda leaks and the movement of French nuclear assets. You don't want to miss what comes next. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me, is Europe finally ready to defend itself? Or is this shadow NATO the beginning of something far more dangerous? I'm reading every comment.